Okay, we are live. After some technical difficulties, here we are live on a Monday night with me, Dr. Yuande. It's great to have you here once again. And so I'm just going to just check the technology here a little bit because yes, it looks like we are good to go. And so if you're catching me live, if you're watching the replay, welcome. It's so great to have you. If this is the first time we're connecting, I'm Dr. Yewande. I'm a medical doctor. I am the founder of Cami Counseling Services, which is a cognitive behavioral psychotherapy practice where we help primarily ambitious women overcome challenges like anxiety, depression, overwhelm so that they can show up as the best versions of themselves at home and at work. So, personally and professionally, this would be a very good time to go ahead and share this live with your sister, your cousins, your friends, because it's going to be a really good one today. We're going to be talking about how to communicate boundaries. We're going to be talking about how to communicate boundaries. So if you haven't yet shared this live, if you haven't yet told your friends, if you haven't yet called your neighbors to join in, now would be a good time to do so. And yeah, we're going to get things started in just a couple of moments. Now, before I actually go into the topic of today, like I said, I'm going to be talking you through how to communicate boundaries. As usual, I like to give some context. Why are we even talking about this topic in the first place? Well, for one thing, if I see something showing up time and time again in my community, time and time again in my practice, it's a cue for me to say, okay, this might be a good topic to bring to the wider audience because, again, I can't see everyone one on one in practice. And so if it's something that keeps coming up time and time again, that's my cue to say, okay, this might be something to bring in some education on. And that's the whole premise of this YouTube channel. Some people might say, well, you have a practice, you're so busy, you're a wife, you're a mom, you have a podcast, you do your newsletter. Why YouTube? Well, once again, so I can reach a wider audience. Everyone consumes content differently. And so some people like to see my face. And then it's nice to be able to engage with you real time as well too. Whereas on the podcast, it's one-on-one, the newsletter, it's email, right? Which a lot of you respond to the emails. It's always great to connect with you that way too. But bringing it this way live always has a different dimension. But of course, if you're watching the replay, do not hesitate to share your thoughts, share your comments, ask your questions, because I will definitely be looking into those questions, looking at those questions and responding to them. And before I forget, if there is a particular topic that you want me to cover during these lives, then by all means, go ahead and leave them in the comments. You can also send me an email privately. My email is linked in the description of the YouTube channel. And that way I will be able to bring that topic up as well during the Monday Night Live. So let's get into today's topic. Once again, if you are joining, thank you so much for joining. It's so great to have you. Okay, we're going to be talking about how to actually communicate in a way that makes you feel good, in a way that makes you feel confident, in a way that makes you feel heard. Many times I'll hear people say, well, what's the point of communicating if nobody is actually going to hear me? What's the point of communicating if nobody is actually going to take me seriously? What's the point of saying speaking my mind if nothing is going to change? We're going to be addressing all of those things here tonight. So, like I said, if you have not yet shared this live, you know, share it. Share it with your friends, share it with your family because it's going to be a really good one. Now, let's take it back a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, we had a really, really interesting conversation on types of communication. So, types of communication, we talked about passive communication, we talked about passive aggressive communication. We talked about aggressive communication. We talked about assertive communication. And we talked about how each of those communication styles can either be helpful or harmful for your relationships. Then we had a conversation about boundaries. We had a conversation about six types of boundaries. We talked about physical boundaries. We talked about time boundaries. We talked about emotional boundaries. We talked about material or financial boundaries. We talked about intellectual or conversational boundaries. We talked about energetic boundaries. We talked about all of that. And we talked about how it's so important for you to be able to set your boundaries such that you have the capacity to enter into the next season. Many of you feel like you are at the precipice of your next season. You are literally going through a season of transition, of transformation, but you do not have the space, the time, the capacity to do what is required to enter into that next season. So we talked about the importance of setting those boundaries so that you are then able to create, you're able to think, you're able to network, send out emails, restructure, do all the things required for you to enter into that next season. Boundaries are important. Now, the thing about boundaries is that they don't exist in isolation. You can't really set boundaries with yourself. You're usually setting boundaries between yourself and something else or someone else. So you're either setting boundaries between you and your digital device. You might be setting boundaries between you and work. You might be setting boundaries between you and certain friends or family members. You might be setting boundaries between you and shopping and how you spend your money, you and impulsive spending, right? And so when it comes to actually setting boundaries and not really setting boundaries with yourself, which is one of the mistakes that I see people make, is that they'll set the boundary, but then they don't communicate the boundary, right? So it's not really a boundary if you haven't if you haven't even just established it for yourself or taken it a step further to communicate the boundary. Now, is it absolutely essential for you to communicate all your boundaries? No. However, many times it is, especially if the dynamic involves someone else, whether it's a colleague, whether it is someone you're in relationship with, a friend, a spouse, kids, right? We're often setting boundaries with our kids as well too. So it's important for us to actually take it the next step and communicate them. Now, this is where many people fall into trouble because they don't know how to go about doing that. So again, like I said, I'll often hear people say, I've said the same thing time and time again. Nobody's listening to me. The question is, how are you saying these things? And are you doing so in the most effective way? So I'm going to be talking about the art and science of communication here because communication isn't just talking. At the end of the day, if you're just talking without any real strategy behind it, it's going to end up sounding like wah, 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 wah. My kids have been watching the Peanuts a lot lately. And, the teacher and I guess other grown-ups in the show don't actually talk. They just go wah, 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 wah. And my daughter has been doing a lot of the wah, 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 wah lately. So, that's what it's going to sound like. Literally, it's going to sound like noise. They're not going to hear you. They're not going to take it in. They're not going to understand you. And so we're going to be talking about the art and science of communication, how to make it as effective as possible so that when you speak about your boundaries, you actually end up heard. And then finally, and then also, we're going to talk about do's and don'ts, right? Again, so that when you do communicate your boundaries, it comes out in a way that makes sense, that's most likely to be heard. And we're going to just go through a formula, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a science to it, right? There is a formula to it. And at the end of the day, using the formula is going to make it as effective as possible. So I think I'm going to go ahead and actually, I won't. I have a worksheet that I use in my practice for this. I um I'll just keep it for now so that it doesn't get too busy, doesn't get too overwhelming, but I will just kind of go through it step by step. So, how do we communicate? So essentially what we're talking about is we establish that we don't want to be passive in our communication. That shouldn't be our go-to approach when it comes to communicating. We also don't want to be aggressive in our communication as well. We don't want to be passive aggressive because it can be confusing. It's not clear. We don't know, people don't really know how to work with that, right? So people don't know what you need, what your needs are, what people don't know. Like, and so if you're passive aggressive, nobody's really going to understand how they can help you or how they can potentially change, right? So the main thing is, what we really want to be is assertive. Now, I want to make sure that you understand that being assertive is not being aggressive. Being assertive is not being aggressive. Unfortunately, many of us have been, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, if you are a Black woman, you may have been led to believe that whenever you speak up, whenever you speak up for yourself, whenever you make demands in a respectful way, you may have been led to believe that you're being aggressive. And so now what you do is you've become more passive or maybe even passive aggressive until all of it gets too much. And then before you know it, you're exploding because of all the pent up anger, resentment, and frustration. So I want you to, first of all, unlearn what it is that you may have been told about being assertive, because being assertive and being aggressive are not the same thing. And it is very important for you to recognize that there is a difference. You can speak your mind and still speak it with a smile. You can still be kind and respectful. Yes, you can have a bit of an edge to your voice, to your tone if need be. However, that does not mean that you're being aggressive. Okay? Here we are going for being assertive. And one of my favorite ways to help people, especially the women in my practice who tend to be givers, they tend to be achievers, they tend to be doers, they put their head down, they do their work. They tend to be more passive, they are team players, they let's call a spade a spade, they have pretty poor boundaries, right? And so one of my favorite ways to help them develop the skill of being assertive in their communication is using what we call I statements. Using what we call I statements. And so, if you've heard of I statements before, let me know in the chat. If you've heard of I statements before, let me know in the chat. Many people will think I statements are any statement that starts with an I, but that's not necessarily the case. You can have statements that start with an I that do not pass the I statement test. And I'm going to show you what an I statement actually looks like. So an I statement basically is a formula. Generally, it has four parts, sometimes just three, but generally it has four parts. And so I statements are a formula that you can use. You can put the four parts together in order to be able to communicate in a way that is assertive, in a way where you are heard, in a way that still expresses your needs, your thoughts, expresses your wants, your requests, while still being very balanced, while still being very respectful and considerate of the other person's point of view. I statements allow you to be direct in that there isn't any kind of underhanded, sarcastic, hard to interpret way. People at the end of the conversation, people are like, okay, what exactly does she need? What exactly does he want? Right. But I statements allow you to be clear, they allow you to be direct. And the beautiful thing about I statements, and this is where the science comes in, is the way that they are phrased minimizes the likelihood that the other person that you're communicating to is going to get defensive. Because how many of you have been in situations where you have tried to express yourself? You have tried to communicate. You have tried to express what your needs are, what your requests are, yet you are met with a wall. You're met with defensiveness, right? You're met with maybe even a deflection where the person starts to turn the table back on you because of whatever reason, right? This is a natural response. when someone feels attacked, right? Feeling like you're being attacked, the natural response to that is going to be defensiveness. It's going to be either fighting back, or it could also be withdrawing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, right? So when you use an I statement in trying to assert yourself and trying to communicate like the woman that you are becoming, that confident, well articulated, well spoken woman who speaks her mind, who's able to stand up for herself, the woman that you're becoming, right? When you do it with an I statement, you minimize the likelihood that the person you're communicating to is going to push back and get defensive. Now I say minimize because at the end of the day, people are gonna be defensive no matter what, right? Some people are just naturally defensive people, and even if you put it in the perfect quote unquote I statements and do whatever you want to do everything that you need to do, they will still push back with defensiveness. So I want to just manage expectations here because at the end of the day, you can do your best and communicate as best as you can, but if you're dealing with unreasonable people, then reasonable methods are not going to work. So I just want to get that out there so that you don't think this is a magic formula that's going to solve all your relationship problems. It's a tool that you can use. And just like every other tool, it's also going to, the tool that you use is going to also, the effectiveness of the tool that you use is also going to be determined by the material that you're using it on, right? And so if you're using it on someone, if you're using I statements with someone who isn't reasonable, I would just say don't expect too much. Having said that, though, I always still encourage every woman that I speak to who is having a challenge to speak up and to communicate. And this is where some unlearning has to happen because many people will say, well, what's the point of communicating if they're not going to change? Well, the point of communicating is so that you change, okay? Not so that they change, so that you change. Because the truth of the matter is the only way that you are going to become that more confident, that more self assured version of yourself is if you start to do things that you normally wouldn't do, regardless of what the other person says, doesn't say, does, or doesn't say. In fact, if you go into a conversation wanting to use I statements and you feel like this is going to be the thing that's going to change the person or change the relationship, your expectations are too high, right? All this is going to do is going to help you be clear and concise in your communication. And it's also going to make you feel good about speaking up at the end of the day. But what I'm going to say is that it has to be used properly. So, what's the point of using I statements in the first place? Well, like I said, a natural response to anyone who feels like they're being attacked is that they are going to get defensive. And you might say, oh, Dr. Yewande, I never attack in my conversations. I never attack. I don't use cuss words. I don't call anyone out of their name. I don't swear. I don't do this. I don't do that. However, the way that you are presenting your complaint or your criticism, even if you're not swearing, even if you are not raising your voice, can still be perceived as an attack. It can, and when I say attack, I don't mean a punch, I don't mean a swear word, but it can still be perceived as an accusation. It can still be perceived as blame, right? And so, what we want to really get away from in order to be assertive in our communication is to go away from statements that sound like blame and accusation and move towards statements that are more that are I statements, basically. So instead of using blaming statements, accusatory statements, we're now moving into using I statements. So I'm going to give you an example. Say you have a teenage son, right? And this teenage son is now asserting their independence and he's going out late at night. And, there's just all this stress that you are worrying about. And so it's Friday night and it's 2 a.m. Your son was supposed to be back by maybe 10 p.m. Now it's 2 a.m. and you've called and called and called, no answer. And now it's 2 a.m. and he walks in the door. Thankfully, he's fine. And but then the next thing you do is you start going, you're so irresponsible. You always stay out late. You never tell me if you're going to be home on time. You're stressing me out and on and on and on. Now, all your son is going to hear is wah, 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 wah. Right? And many of you might be dealing with this now, potentially, right? In this situation, I know you are pointing out things that the son has done and you're not happy about. The problem is that going at it with a blaming or accusing statement, all that's going to do is cause the listener to shut down. I'll give another example. Say you have an arrangement in your home where your husband is supposed to take the garbage out on garbage day, and it's been 3 weeks in a row and he's forgotten. Okay. And then you come at it at you're so forgetful. Why do I have to remind you all the time? You do this all the time. You're always so this and that and the other. You're so lazy, right? Many people might actually think, and I've heard this where people don't think that that is that is an attack, right? But what you're doing there is you're criticizing someone else's character. You're criticizing someone else's character. And I'm going to give examples of what she can do instead. And the reason why this is an ineffective way of communicating is automatically that person is going to shut down, whether that person is a colleague, whether that person is your employee, right? Someone who works for you, whether that person is a child, your son, your daughter, whether that person is whoever it may be, your sister. The minute you come at it with, you are so this, you are irresponsible, you are forgetful, you are lazy, you never listen to me, you're being unfair, they're either going to attack back trying to defend themselves, or they're going to shut down. As opposed to, let's go back to the teenage son example, as opposed to, okay, it's 2 a.m., he's home. I feel really worried when I don't hear from you and you're coming home late, because I start wondering if something bad has happened to you. I start wondering if you've been in an accident. I need you to text me and let me know when you're going to be home late. Do you hear the difference between that and you're so irresponsible, you never listen? How can I trust you if you can't keep the rules? You always stay out late. How am I supposed to know if you're okay? I want to know, do you hear the difference between the blaming statement and the I statement? I am going to break down the I statement for you, but I would love to hear, do you hear the difference? Do you hear the difference? Do you hear the difference? Oh, thank you, sweet girl. And if you do, I would love to also know which of these two, how would you prefer for someone to speak to you? Would you prefer for someone to speak to you using the blaming tone, or would you prefer someone to speak to you using the I statement tone? Would you prefer for someone to speak to you using the blaming tone or the I statement tone? Personally, I would prefer the I statement tone. Let's use the garbage example. So it's been 3 weeks. Your husband hasn't taken out the garbage like he said he would, like you agreed to. And as opposed to saying, you're so forgetful, why do I have to remind you all the time? You're so lazy. I feel frustrated whenever I come home, it's garbage day, and the garbage isn't done because we had an agreement. And I would appreciate it if you could maybe set a reminder so that when it's garbage day, you can take your garbage out. Right. I'm just coming up with that. When it's garbage day, you can take the garbage out. So I'm just riffing here, coming up with alternatives as we go. Right. So again, you're speaking up. Again, you are speaking your mind, but you're doing it in a way that is respectful, that isn't attacking the other person's character. Okay. Whenever you use blaming statements like you're so this, you're always that, the person's going to feel attacked. They're going to get defensive. It's a natural physiological response. It is our fight or flight mode that's getting activated because even though the person is not being chased by an animal, that part of their physiology, right? The part of the brain that is sensitive to emotions is going to get flooded by emotions. It's going to get flooded by guilt. It's going to get flooded by shame. It may get flooded by feelings of inadequacy, right? And what that's going to do is trigger the same fight or flight response. And the fighting may not be running away from, the fighting may not be punching and scratching and kicking. It's going to be a verbal fight. It's going to be a verbal fight. Or it could be a flight mode where it may not be running away from the attack, like literally running away as if an animal is chasing them, but it might look like walking out of the conversation when you start on your you're so this, you're so that, you're so this, you're so that. They just walk out. They leave the room. And if they can't leave the room, maybe they're in the car, you're in the car, you're always so late, you're never on time, you're so disorganized. Maybe you're on your way to an event and he's late or she's late and you're like you're so disorganized, you're never on time, can't you get your act together? They may not be able to run out of the car and they may not fight back, but they're going to zone out. They're going to withdraw. They're going to enter into their shell. They may just give you blank stares, go cold, silent, right? Shutting down. If it's a phone conversation and you're going on, you're so this, you're so that, you're so lazy, you're so disorganized, they're going to hang up. They're going to hang up. Now, many of you may not be this harsh in your criticism. You may not call someone lazy. You may not call someone disorganized. You may not call someone, um, you may not call someone irresponsible. If you do, I've just explained to you why it has been totally ineffective. Now, many of you might actually have gotten to the point where you suppressed and you've been passive and you've suppressed and you've been passive, and then one day you snap and all of it comes out. Many of you, on the other hand, may have just stayed passive and continue to stay passive, but what's happening is the resentment is just building up and you're now feeling resentful towards the other person. And what is resentment? It's that anger. It's a feeling of bitterness. It's a feeling of anger towards that person. You can't stand the person. You're starting to have thoughts, what we call contempt towards that person, all because you haven't expressed yourself. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and looking out for questions. And so don't hesitate to ask any questions as we go along. I will definitely be looking out for those questions in the chat. So I've talked about why blaming statements are not effective. And even if you're gentle with it, even if you're quiet with it, even if you're subtle with it, they're not effective. Passive, the passive approach is also not effective because if you have never communicated how you feel, how are people supposed to know? People aren't going to know. They're not going to be able to change. So now let's talk about what the I statement actually sounds like. I mentioned that there are four parts to the I statement. And as I was giving those examples with the teenage son going out late, as I was giving the example of the husband not taking out the garbage, I was giving the example of the spouse not being on time for an event. I gave a couple, I didn't give examples for all of them, but I gave a couple of examples. I'm going to just give an example for the spouse that's late for the event. And it could go like, I feel when you know that I have this important company event to go to, and you're not ready on time because it makes me look bad before my boss and my colleagues. I need you to start getting ready 3 hours before we're ready to leave so that you're ready on time. Very different from you're so disorganized, you don't respect my time, you don't know how to manage your time, very different. So I'm actually going to break down those examples for you and why, even as you're listening, they sound so much better than the you're so this, you're so that, you're so this, you're so that. So like I said, there are four parts to the I statement. Part number one is your emotion. Part number one is, how do I actually feel? How do I actually feel? How do I feel about what's going on here? You know what? I'm feeling bad for Instagram. It's just, I told them that I wouldn't be coming on live on Instagram, but you know what? I'm feeling kind of bad. So let me, um, let me hop on live there and see if anyone would like to join in. All right. Interesting. Okay. Super interesting. Okay. Let me we'll continue here and I'll just get them. I'll post the replay for my Instagram people later. All right, so let's talk about the four parts. The first part is how you feel, how you feel. And this is where having a tool like the feelings wheel and emotions wheel is going to be super important. Now, if you are not yet using something like a feelings wheel or an emotions wheel to identify your emotions, you are missing out. Most of us are only able to talk about our feelings in terms of I'm sad, in terms of I'm angry, I'm happy. Maybe now we're learning to use terminology like anxious, but sometimes when we say we're anxious, and I see this time and time again, when we say we're anxious, we actually mean we're overwhelmed or we're tired. Different, right? When we say we're sad, okay, is this sad from guilt or is this sad from loneliness? What flavor of sadness is it? Right? So if you don't know how to use the feelings wheel, it's actually very simple to use. And I'm sure you can find resources on how to use it. Learn to use the feelings wheel because when you are up at 2 a.m. waiting for your family member to come home, when the garbage hasn't been taken out for the third or fourth week in a row, when you are late for a company event because your spouse wasn't ready on time, you'll need to be able to identify how you're feeling. You will need to be able to identify how you're feeling because if you don't know how you're feeling, how are you going to communicate it to somebody else? Right? So you need to be able to learn how to identify how you're feeling. Then you need to be able to be specific enough about what you're feeling that way about. It's not enough to say that I feel frustrated. Well, why do you feel frustrated? Are you feeling frustrated because of what happened last week or are you feeling frustrated because of what happened this morning? Like what are you feeling frustrated about? Why are you feeling frustrated? What's the impact of what's happening? Why are you feeling frustrated? Because again, it's going to be important to be able to put that all together so that the person you're communicating to has a clearer picture of what's going on. Okay. So the first part is how you feel. The second part is you feel, what you feel that way about, what the situation is. The third part is why, so the impact. And the fourth part is then what your request is. What's your need, right? What is your need? What is your request? What do you want out of the other person? What do you want from the other person? Now, this is not a license to manipulate. This is not a license to be unreasonable in your request. This is where you actually sit down and you're thoughtful about what it is that you need in this dynamic. What do you need in this dynamic? Right? So, number one, Number one is how you feel. How do you feel, or how did you feel if it's something that it's in the past? Number two is when do you feel that way, or when did you feel that way? So what was the situation? Number three is why, so the impact. And then number four is what is your request? What is your need? What is your request? So it's going to look like I feel, insert emotion, when you insert the action or inaction, because insert the impact. And then finally, I need slash want you to insert the request. So four parts. So in the case of the teenage son, it would sound like I feel worried and scared when you are not home when you say that you're going to be home, because I wonder if something bad has happened to you. I wonder if you've gotten into an accident. I wonder if there has been a situation that needs me to show up. I wonder if you need help. I need you to text me if you're going to be coming home past the agreed upon time. Or I need you to come home at the agreed upon time. Right? Let's talk about the example with the garbage, right? So the question, so again, it would be I feel frustrated when you don't take out the garbage for weeks at a time, because then it's an invitation for rodents, it's an invitation for, odor, right? I need you to set an alarm so that you can remember to take out the garbage when you're supposed to. Okay. Let's talk about the getting ready on time example. I feel disrespected when you take your sweet time knowing that I have this important company event that my career is riding on, because it makes me look bad before my colleagues and my boss. I need you to start getting ready 3 hours before we're supposed to leave. Do you see how different that is compared to you're so lazy, you're so disorganized, you're so irresponsible, and it's not even helpful? That approach of accusation is not even helpful. Neither is keeping quiet. Neither is keeping quiet. Neither is being passive or being passive aggressive. And I'm specifically talking to women who know that they want to do better, either in how they communicate effectively. Of course, this applies to men too, right? But also those who recognize that they want to start speaking up. They're evolving into the type of woman that speaks up for herself and isn't just a doormat, isn't just, oh, so and so will do it. Oh, so and so will take care of it. Oh, Jane will do it. Jane will take care of it. Oh, just ask Jane. Jane always says yes. Whereas Jane on the inside is getting more and more bitter and more resentful. Well, it's time to speak up. It's time to speak up. Okay. Questions? If any questions? So, one thing that I do want to say, a couple of things before I wrap up for today, that I do want to say is that sorry. Okay. One thing that I do want to say, so when it comes to using I statements, it's important to understand that you want to keep it as concise as possible, right? You don't want to keep going on and on. Keep it to one situation, whether it's staying out late, whether it is not taking out the garbage, whether it is not being ready on time for this important company event. Keep it to one situation, because if you start shoehorning, forcing all the past mistakes and grievances into one conversation, the person is just going to get overwhelmed. And I know that, yes, when we have the audience of the person we're trying to communicate our boundaries to, when we have their audience, we want to just air all our grievances. But this is where self control, when it comes to communication, is going to be so important, because that approach is going to backfire. If you are doing too much, at some point, your efforts are going to start to backfire. So you want to stick to one situation to the best of your ability. Keep it concise, keep it to the four parts we talked about: the feelings, the situation, the impact, and then the request. Stick to the facts. Try not to bring in hearsay, try not to bring in, oh, and then this person said this and this person said that. Keep it to the facts. Like you heard the examples that I shared earlier, they were very factual. And like I mentioned earlier, the emotions wheel is going to be your best friend, because at the end of the day, in the heat of the moment, you may not be able to pinpoint exactly how you feel about what's happened or what didn't happen. But when you have a tool like the emotions wheel, it's going to be so helpful in helping you identify and pinpoint what it is that you're feeling in this particular situation that you're trying to communicate. Now, I remember one of the first people I shared this tool with, and she was having a challenge with her sister. They were sharing a room, or they were sharing a space, and her sister used to work night shifts. And whenever her sister would come back home, she would make such a big noise. She would be cooking in the kitchen. And then the person I was talking to about these I statements, she she would wake up, couldn't go back to sleep, and it was just making her angry at her sister, and they would end up having arguments. So we talked about using I statements to give her feedback, right? And it's important to note that using I statements is a tool for feedback. It is not a manipulation tool. It is not even necessarily a behavior change tool, because at the end of the day, behavior change is in the hands of someone else. All you can do is communicate to the best of your ability. So going back to my story, she came back and she was like, you know what, Dr. Yewande, I used these I statements and they did not work. They did not work. I statements don't work. And I said, okay, talk to me about how you used your I statements. And she said, okay, so my sister came home at 2 a.m. I was fast asleep. I'd had a long day at work myself, and I had a busy day ahead tomorrow. And she wakes up as usual and is making a ton of noise. And so I wake up, I get out of bed, and I tell her, I feel so mad at you right now because every time you come home, you make so much noise and it's affecting my sleep. I need you to be quiet when you come home. And I said, whoa, let us reel it back. What you did right was you used the four parts. However, the part that you didn't do well is your tone, your timing, and your body language. Your tone, your timing, and your body language. Because at the end of the day, I statements are just one part of effective communication. You still have to watch your tone. You still have to make sure the timing is right. And you still have to watch your body language, because if your tone is aggressive, even if you use the perfect, you know, formula for I statements, the person is still going to perceive it as a threat. If your body language is aggressive and you're pointing and you're shaking your fist and you're rolling your head and you are, I feel so disrespected right now. Again, it's still going to be perceived as an attack, as blame, as accusation. One thing I know is that if there is a Manchester United game on, that is not a good time to have a feedback I statement conversation with my husband, because he's not even he's not even here. Okay. He's in Old Trafford Square or wherever it is that they play. I hope I got that right. I better have gotten that right. Right. So at the end of the day, your tone, your timing, your body language, they all have to be on point, because if you use the perfect I statement and you're still coming across as aggressive, you're still coming across as blaming, accusation, as accusatory, you're rolling your eyes, you're being sarcastic, your body language, you're sighing, all those passive aggressive things we talked about, might as well just forget about it. The other thing I want to say is that many people will feel under pressure. The other thing I want to say is that many people will feel under pressure to use the I statements in the heat of the moment. And I want to strongly discourage you from doing that. Discourage you from doing that. Go back, take, take full advantage of the power of the pause. Go back, think about what you want to say in part one, part two, part three, part four, write it down, practice it if you need to, and then come in a state where the emotions have dissipated. Because once emotions have entered the chat, just forget about it. Once the emotions have entered the chat, once there's that flooding of emotions, what happens is that the rational part of your brain is not even there anymore. Neither are they going to be receiving what you have to say rationally, because emotions are so powerful. All they are thinking about in that moment is survival. How do I get out of this? How do I get out of this uncomfortable feeling of feeling flooded by my emotions? Now, I had mentioned earlier that it's important to recognize that at the end of the day, I statements, think about it as giving feedback, because many of us feel frustrated when we don't have that dialogue, when we don't have that immediate response, when we don't get that apology, when we don't get that acknowledgement, when the other person goes silent, or recognize that they may need some time to think through what you just said to them. Recognize that not everyone is going to be able to respond to you right away, nor do you necessarily need them to. Find some people might apologize right away and say, okay, I'm so sorry for coming home late. I'm so sorry for forgetting to take the garbage out. They may apologize for, I'm really sorry for making you late for this company event. They may apologize, but also don't be surprised if they just don't say anything, because sometimes people need time to process. So what I'm trying to say is that don't use I statements as a conversation starter, because trying to use them as a conversation starter might just lead to frustration. Think about it as giving feedback, right? Think about it as giving feedback. The example that I'll often give is, say you have a store and you've hired someone to man the front desk. And every time you come out of your office, the person is on their phone. You could come at it and see, and customers are coming in and leaving, and they're coming in and leaving, and this person isn't doing what you hired them to do. You could come at it and say, you're so disrespectful, you're so lazy, you're not paying attention, you're too distracted. Why did I even hire you in the first place? And the person is going to look at you and be like, where is all of this coming from? I literally just spent an hour cleaning and organizing your store. What do you mean I'm lazy? Right? It's going to take the conversation in a completely different direction. Versus when you come and say, I feel disappointed whenever I come out of my office and on your phone and a customer isn't being attended to, because it makes our store look like we're not serious about taking care of our customers. I need you to put your phone away during office hours. Feel free to use it at your break. But while you're at the front, I need you to put your phone away. Right? You are not, at the end of the day, you've given your feedback. It's now up to the employee to decide what they're going to do with that. They may change. You might come back tomorrow and they're still on their phone. That's out of your control. That is totally out of your control. So understand that whenever you speak up, and this is going to be very important, especially for my ladies who do not speak up, whenever you speak up does not guarantee that the person is going to change. But what it does do is it gives you your voice back. It gives you your voice back. Now, what they decide to do with the feedback, that's out of your hands. However, they cannot claim that they didn't know. This employee cannot claim that they didn't know that you were disappointed about their behavior, right? Your son cannot claim that he did not know that you were worried every time he doesn't come home on time. Your spouse cannot claim that they didn't know that they felt disrespected whenever you weren't ready on time, right? Whenever they weren't ready on time, right? And so at the end of the day, I want you to recognize that when it comes to communication, yes, it's about getting your point across as clearly and as effectively as possible. But and hopefully the person will take the feedback and change, but you cannot make anybody change. More importantly, though, is who are you becoming when you start to speak up? Who are you becoming when you start to not only recognize your boundaries, but also communicate what they are? Who are you becoming? Who is that next season of your life requiring you to be? And how does that person communicate? Right? You cannot wait to be that person to start doing what that girl does, what that woman does. You start doing what that woman does in order to become who she is. And communicating assertively is one of those things. Okay? Communicating assertively is one of those things. So, just to summarize, all right, and I want to say thank you for everyone who joined live today. Thank you. My husband communicated. My husband corrected me. He said Old Trafford, not old, no square. Okay, thank you. Point taken. So Old Trafford, Manchester United plays at Old Trafford. So just to summarize, today we talked about I statements. We talked about the importance of using I statements and how it's an art and a science. It's an art because it takes practice, it takes finessing, it takes thinking through. It's a science because we're leveraging on human biology, physiology, and psychology to be as effective as possible in our communication. I statements are a tool to communicate our wants, our needs, our requests in a way that increases the chances that we're going to get heard. But even more importantly, I statements are a tool for personal transformation and reinvention. Because if you want to become that woman who is assertive, who is confident, who speaks up for herself, you have to start talking like her. You have to start communicating like her. And using I statements is one of those ways. All right. So if you enjoyed today's session, please share with a friend. Okay. The more of us who are able to speak our minds in a way that is clear, concise, but still respectful, the happier our world will be. And if you are in a season of transformation and you are looking for a place to actually implement those things, craft your I statements, come up with a plan that will take you from where you are to where you need to be, and then you need to join my email list so that you can be at our next co-working session. Our next co-working session is going to be happening on Monday, March 30th, if I'm not mistaken. This is where a community of women just like you come together to actually map out our goals. We map out our goals, we map out our strategy, whether it's for a reinvention in our career, whether it's a reinvention in our practices, in our finances, in our fitness, whatever it might look like. We create that space to actually come together, do the work together so that we can enter into the next season and become the woman the next season is calling us to be. So the link to join my newsletter is, let me just pull it up here. Okay. Yeah. So Kami Company, so KAMY company.kit.com/newsletter, or you can go to kamicompany.kit.com/co-working. It'll all be in the description as well too. Unfortunately, the technology that I wanted to use that actually shows the links It does it so beautifully, was not picking up my camera, so I had to quickly troubleshoot and head over to Zoom. But that's it. That's it. We talked about assertive communication. We talked about I statements. We talked about using them not only as a tool to communicate, but a tool for transformation, a tool for reinvention. And so, if you have any questions after watching the replay, definitely put them in the comments. There will be no Monday Night Live next week. I will be out of town. However, I'm planning something extra special for everybody at the end of the month. And so look out for announcements that way. The best way to get those announcements are to stay on the newsletter. And I will catch you in the comments. I will catch you in the emails. And until next time, I want to remind you that you are doing so much better than you think. Bye.